Welcome to my video on how to build with Taric. Many people ask me, why do you take this rune? Why do you take this build? Like, what are you doing? I don't understand all of your stuff. This is trying to teach how I build with Taric. So let's just get right into it, right? Why is Taric's itemization so complex? It's because he benefits from various stats in the game. He benefits from AD, attack speed, AP, armor, mana, HP, healing, shielding power, movement speed. He obviously needs ability haste. He needs MR if they're AP, and there's a lot of stats that he benefits from. So the majority of items in the shop will be good for Taric unless it's like crit or like some, even like some lethality items could be good. But realistically, other than like the AP heavy items, the majority of items in the shop are good for Taric. So, obviously though, if you build the wrong item at the wrong time, then you're going to struggle, right? If you build damage versus range, then you're going to struggle. If you build mobility items versus melees, then you're going to struggle, because you're just not going to be able to stand still and tank everything. So, you have to be smart with it. Taric in the jungle versus support also has a lot more gold to work with, right? So, the builds get complicated because Taric isn't used to having as much gold as he does when he plays jungle. So that opens up a lot of space for different items. So the core components of your build is going to have a keystone rune, a mythic item, and some legendary items. And you're going to look for a way, to synergize them, right? You're going to start with 2 of the 3, right? You want the rune, and then what you're going to be building. You don't have to know your mythic, or you don't have to know your legendary. You just need to know what you're starting with, right? So it's like, I go into it on the next page, but you want to know what synergy you're going to make in your build before you go into your game. And, like I'm saying in that note there, it's just like, oh, I see a certain enemy team comp, and it's like I know it's Frozen Heart Chains, or I know it's Divine Lethal or something, and then the rest I figure out later in the game itself and kind of adapt to what's happening. So here's some examples, right? So I'm using around 4 core builds right now. They include PTA, Even Shroud, right? The idea of making everyone around you just take lots of damage. Works well with Abyssal, but that's just one. Lethal Tempo Divine, rapid fire healing, basically just stand still and heal. Really good against tanks and melees, or you just stand still and heal yourself and your allies extremely quickly. There's Phase Rush Frostfire, which basically just means you want to hit them with the Frostfire proc, and that's going to give you Phase Rush, and then you use the Phase Rush to reposition or chase your targets. So this is a very mobile build. And then there's basically Frozen Heart Rush into Chains or Mythic, where you're rushing Frozen Heart, and the enemy team is very AD heavy, so that can, Frozen Heart will just, it allows you to not have to build tier, and so Frozen Heart is just very, very good build to have, because you're just saving that 400 gold that you don't need to spend tier on. And then whatever Mythic, or if you're gonna go Chains, if they have like 3 or 4 AD and just 1 AP threat, then Chains works really well with that. And there's even more combinations on top of it, right? It's like, past this point, there's more synergies like Abyssal, like I mentioned. But for the beginning, don't think about that. Think about just like the 2-ish things that you will put together. Rune and Mythic, or Rune and Legendary, kind of. Most of these are actually Rune plus Mythic, but I guess Frozen Heart Chains is the special exception to that, right? And I still go items like Sunfire, Death's Dance, Bork, for whatever, but they don't have like synergistic pairings with other like items like these do, but they do and they don't, right? It's like Bork. Think about Bork. It's like, okay, if you have Bork, you don't want lethal. Why do you don't want lethal with Bork? It's because that'll give you too much attack speed and you'll overcap. Something like Death's Dance, you might not want Frozen Heart and Death's Dance at the same time, because maybe that's too much armor on top of whatever mythic you have. So, there's certain items that you want to go with each other, and certain runes that you don't want to go things with, like, Frostfire has an on-hit slow, right? And so you don't want to build Dead Man's Plate, with Frostfire because that's, they both have non-hit slow and they don't stack. Slows don't stack in this game. So, there's a lot of different item synergies and item/rune anti-synergies that you need to be aware of when building. But, there's, you learn that as you go a little bit. So what do I look for? I look for mostly, are they ranged? Are they mobile? And what type of damage do they do? Right? These are the main core things that I actually look for. If they're high range, high mobility, then you want, to be fast and to be tanky. And if they are not ranged and not mobile, then you want to still be tanky, but not so much care about the movement speed to chase them and just worry about being able to tank everything or heal fast or deal damage. And obviously their enemy damage type matters because it's going to change if they're AD, you're building armor. If they're AP, you're building magic resist and true damage, max HP damage I go into on the next page. Same thing, secondary indicators of a build is going to be like their versatility. Like a great example right now is AP Varus, since he can go AP and he can also go AD. And because you don't know what they're going to go in champ select, you see the Varus and you go, okay, is he AP? Is he AD? Well, maybe I can't go this Frozen Heart build because if he goes AP, then they're actually not going to have 3 AD, 1 AP. They're going to have 2 AP, 2 AD. And so that's going to mess with the builds. So you have to be able to pivot, right? If the enemy is going a certain build, because various champions have different builds that they can go. And lots of special cases, right? Like I go into it on the next page, right? With or actually these are just the primary ones first, right? And exactly what I said, right? It's just like if they're high range, high mobility, you can spec into more mobility, and yeah. And so I guess the only thing I didn't really cover is the shred pen, and there's certain, like, if you're building Frozen Heart and you're facing like Wukong, Kayn, and maybe like, I don't know, Vayne's not a good example, but something that's going to shred your armor, you might as well not even go like a Frozen Heart and pick up something like a Death Dance instead, because if you're just going to build, Frozen Heart and they're just going to first item Black Cleaver, then you just kind of screwed yourself anyway, because the more armor you have, the more armor gets shredded, and therefore their item is worth more and yours are worth less. So you need to be aware of if they can actually shred or pen through, like, Liandry's or Void Staff and various items like that. Let's just see. I just lost my train of thought immediately. But yeah, so that's like, all of these things matter, right? And then I go into these. This is what I was mentioning with like Frozen Heart, for example, is great. Like, they might have a Mastery or an Olaf, and you're looking to go Frozen Heart because they have 3 AD, 1 AP, but Olaf's R and Yi's R ignore the Frozen Heart aura, right? They're going to ignore the attack speed slow, and on top of that, they do true damage. So you can't go Frozen Heart build even though you want to, and so you have to look for something else to build, like a Death Dance or some sort of like Divine Visage build. Here's another one where an ally team has a lot of ADCs and the enemy team has a lot of tanks, bruisers. You might want to go Divine Sunder lethal, but if you have a bunch of ADCs and they have tanks and they're going to build full armor, then your ADCs aren't going to do any damage. So you might want to look for a way to find Ardent as a second or third item, and you're going to have to mess with your whole build because you can't go lethal Divine with Ardent because Ardent gives you attack speed and so does lethal. So maybe you could even go like a PTA Divine Ardent, but realistically you'd end up just going like not Divine at all. You'd end up going like a Even Shroud or Frostfire build, and then just picking up an Ardent second or third. And then Trundle's a great example of when you go Death Dance, because he steals your resist, so you don't want resist, not because he shreds it, but because he steals it from you. So the survivability is built into the item, not the the actual core resist that it gives. So, and heavy slows like Nasus Wither is a great example that forces Phase Rush instead of something else, because the Wither is just so disgusting that the only way to really escape it is to use a Phase Rush proc to give yourself slow resistance to actually run away from that. But yeah, so simply, right, if the enemy has too much or little of something, then the build will be made exploiting that weakness, right? If they have 5 AD champions, if they're all melee, if they're all ranged, right? If they're 5 AD, it's like, oh man, I can go Frozen Heart usually. Or, you know, if they're all melee, I can go divine, you know, visage builds, usually, right? But, you know, you just have to look for, in the enemy team comp, what is, like, what do they have too much or too little of, and base your build around that weakness. Also, Ghost versus Flash, right? Usually Ghost, right? I use Ghost most of the time. And Ghost is just more consistent, easy to use than Flash, because you want to use your auto attacks to be effective, instead of, like, for example, in the support lane where you use Flash because the lane is shorter, you can't chase them as far, and you're more concerned about landing your stun and kind of setting up your allies' damage. So that's why you take Glacial Flash in the bot lane, but, you know, in the jungle you usually want Ghost. You can take Ghost on support. Some people have had success with it, but I don't do that unless I have a weird matchup. Flash in the jungle is strictly to deal with certain wall matchups like Jarvan, Viger, and Ivia, etc., like Talia, or Blink Avoidance, right? Where it's like you see a set R or you see a set W, and you can use the Flash to avoid those, you know, crucial abilities, to, you know, just avoid them. So otherwise, you basically want to use Ghost, just because it's just better, right? And so here's some example games where you see the enemy teams and it says, did I go the same builds in these 4 games? Why or why not? Right? Like, you know, here's a multiple choice question. Like, do you think I went the same build in all these games? Like, what am I looking at, right? It's like, you see this team, you see this team. And I mean, I could give you the answers or I could not give you the answers of why I went one build or the other. But, you know, just feel free to take a look. Maybe if you're on YouTube, pause the video if you want. And just take a few guesses. Using those, just to say it off the top of my head again, PTA, Even Shroud, Frostfire, Phase Rush, Divine Lethal, and Frozen Heart. What do you think I'm going where? Or all of them, right? Are they all Frozen Heart? Are they all Divine, right? There's reasons for one or the other. So go ahead and unpause if you're ready to guess, and here it is. So, nope, I didn't go any of the same builds in any of these games. At all, even though you could definitely argue that I could have, right? It's like, okay, you see this team of Yasuo, you know, Hecarim, and Vayne, and this is a 3 AD team, and Frozen Heart is even really good against Vayne, so ideally I could have went Frozen Heart Chains here. Frozen Heart to deal with these 3, and then Chains to deal with Sylas, and that would have been fine, and it would have been fine. But I decided to opt for Even Shroud, Tabbies, and Ardent. So my idea here is, my team is full AD. I have Darius, Aurelia, and Samira. And if this Heck gets really fed, and now he's really strong, if he's really fed and gets strong and he builds a Frozen Heart, then my team is not going to be able to do anything against him. So I'm building this in case of the fact of, you know, them getting ahead and building, like, you know, heavy armor items, because, you know, my team is full AD and would be destroyed by that. In a game like this, right, you know, should I be building Frozen Heart? Well, probably not. I probably mistook this. I'm pretty sure this is actually a mandate Ashe support with a Sona ADC. I probably mistook this for a AD Ashe, and so I thought it was Frozen Heart because of these 3. But realistically, maybe this wasn't even a Frozen Heart game, and I just built wrong here, right? I make mistakes too. It happens, right? Maybe this should have been an Even Shroud game or something else. This game with a Death Dance, right? I mentioned the Death Dance is a counter to Trundle. Because he steals your resist, so you don't really want to go full into resist. Like if I had gone Frozen Heart, you know, Frostfire, and he steals, you know, he ults me, then he's going to get a ridiculous amount of armor. So, you know, that's not something you ideally want to do. And there's a game like this where it looks like I went lethal. I didn't even go Divine here. I went, you know, Sunfire. Why? Probably because of, it looks like what I was trying to go was probably like a PTA Sunfire Abyssal, but I just happened to have lethal because I was going to go Divine. And then I realized after I got into the game that this was definitely not a Divine game, right? They're too squishy. They're not tanky enough. So I ended up switching to Sunfire instead, and you know, still going for that burn, right? Because I've got that Abyssal, because I've got a Renekton who, you know, they're not going to build any MR. But if these guys build MR, which they did, I think he had like a Maw and some other things. I've got an AP Varus and a, you know, a support that does AP damage, and a Seraphine that does AP damage, so I'm looking for a build that I can use and pick up this Abyssal with. And so, yeah, there's a lot of different things to these builds. You know, just to briefly mention before I even get off, is just like, we mentioned attack speed and ability haste a lot, and you know, they're both core as Taric to, you know, you want to stun as much as possible, and so, you know, you want ability haste to lower your all of your cooldowns, but you also want attack speed because every auto attack with your passive lowers your cooldowns by 1 second. So you need a very good balance of attack speed and ability haste. You don't want too much of one or the other. You don't want full attack speed with no ability haste, and you don't want full ability haste with no attack speed, right? You want like that perfect combination of both. So that's why you won't see, you know, like lots of attack speed items or lots of ability haste items all at once. But yeah, that should be about it. Figuring out to build, what to build with Taric can be hard, but it's worth the challenge. It's one of the things that makes Taric so fun. Be sure to experiment with various items and synergies, because the best build for you might not even be one of the ones I use. Hell, I mean, people used to go, you know, various things. There's tons of different builds you could go, but I've shown you what I use. Feel free to look at the Mobifier or Discord for more info, or schedule a coaching session with me to go into even greater detail, which is definitely found in the description, right? You know, once again, I try to keep this this as ideal as possible, right? You saw this in the section, and then there's all these builds that have long been retired, you could say. They're just bad for one reason or another. You know, not going to go into detail of that because I'd like to keep this video short, but you know, that is something to keep in mind, that there's plenty of other options and info here to look at. So that's about it. See you.